Welcome everyone to the Alternative UK, the Elephant Room. My name is Indra Adnan, and I'm the co-initiator of the Alternative UK. And also on this call, just about, is Pat Kane, my other co-initiator, and Maria Dorothea Skov, who works with us and is generally our producer of events. And just a few words before, and a quick overview so that you get some idea of what to expect this evening. So this is neither a webinar nor a workshop, but it's something in between. It's an extended conversation. And I'm going to be chatting with Laura Hopes and Laylee Hampton from Still Moving for about 20 to 25 minutes. And then you'll have a chance to ask them any immediate questions. We'll go out into breakout rooms after that so that you can have a discussion amongst yourselves a bit deeper, talking and listening with each other. And then we'll come back in for another chance to share your ideas with Laura and Laylee. And just a few words on the elephant. Over the past 3 years, the Alternative has been asking the question, if politics is broken, what's the alternative? And one thing that became clear to us is that the current politics is part of, or maybe in service to, a socioeconomic system that is busy destroying our planet. We won't be able to deliver a new politics until we have a good sense of the new socioeconomic system that it could be part of. And the elephant is the project that tries to name that new system. And by socioeconomic system, I'm really talking about however we'd like to really describe our society and our relationship between the person and the planet, however and whatever perspective you might want to take on that. The thing we know is there, but don't know quite yet how to talk about. So last December, we gathered 30 people together who we felt had been busy creating that system, but have not yet come together as a fully working system so that other people can see and buy into it. And like the blind men and the elephant, each one can see a part of it, but none of them can quite see the whole thing. And each episode of this series invites another of these partially blind men or women to come and show us their perspective on the elephant, in the hope that over the whole of the series, we'll be able to visualize it in our minds. So now I'd like to introduce you to Laura Hopes and Laylee Hampton. Perhaps you'd like to wave, the two of you, so that everybody can see that you're here. Who I first came across really by observing and seeing their work of art in the Plymouth Sound. And as many of you know, the Alternative UK has been working for the past 3 years actually in Plymouth, together with a whole group of social entrepreneurs, artists, but also the people who live together in the communities from as broad a stretch across Plymouth as we can. And we held 3 collaboratories in Plymouth. In fact, it was 6 because we did 3 online as well, to try to get a sense from the people there how they felt about the future and what they might do to give rise to a new future. But it's been difficult over COVID to continue that conversation. And it's been quite a gift to us that the work that Laura and Laylee have been doing have, in a sense, not only continued that conversation, but taken it even further. So I'd like now to introduce Laura and Laylee, or in fact, invite you both to introduce yourselves and give everyone a sense of what it is that you did in Plymouth and what the effects of that were. And then perhaps Pat and I will ask you a few questions before we go into a broader conversation with everyone else here. So over to you.
We're 2 of 3, so the third is missing. It's important to recognise it would not be in existence, our sculpture, without Martin Hampton, who's the third part of our collective, which is called Still Moving. And I'm Laylee Hampton, as you were saying. And I thought, well, we thought we could let the work sort of speak to it for itself. So if I share my screen, Laura, you might want to start with saying what you'd like to say about it, and I'll get back to that.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having us here. And I think it's really quite an honour for you to say that our work is kind of continuing to pick up some of the threads of work that you've been doing physically in Plymouth as well. And we're really interested in how our work speaks to so many different themes in a very kind of linked way, because as is the problem with colonialism or climate emergency or capitalism, as we are, some of us only just coming to realize, these things are intrinsically linked and dependent on one another as systems. And it is our hope that these sort of three very simple words that Laylee is about to share with you, that face the city of Plymouth, reflect on the city's present, but also reflecting on its past. And this was a piece of work that has been made possible through the commissioning process of the Mayflower 400 Committee. And for those of you who are not familiar with this programme, this year marks the 400th anniversary of the sailing from Plymouth of the ship the Mayflower from the UK to the Americas, and really that very formal wave of settler colonisation that it was the spearhead for. And within that sort of anachronistic system of commemorating this date, we feel like we've managed to sort of smuggle in an artwork which in a very public way manages or attempts to talk about some of the really complicated histories that are often overlooked in the telling of the Mayflower story. So the name of our sculpture is Speedwell, which is the name of the companion ship to the Mayflower, and it's the ship that never actually managed to make that voyage across the Atlantic. There's various conflicting stories that maybe it was sabotaged by the captain who didn't want to make the journey, he wanted to be paid more, or that it was just a leaky old ex-naval vessel that wasn't fit for the journey. So it limped back into Plymouth along with the Mayflower and never made that final journey. And we were really interested to explore the concept of failure and to use the sort of vulnerability of that experience as a strength, really, in opening up and exploring ideas around home, ideas around belonging, around journeys, around needs to escape your current situation, to try out a new existence. All of these kind of explorations that are wrapped up in those ideologies, if you like, of the settlers that were frustrated by the returning of the Speedwell, and that idea of needing to look after the place where you are and that need to make home where you are. So this sculpture is on the Mountbatten Breakwater, which is a really interesting liminal space between the city and between the Atlantic, and it faces the city very much. It faces the Mayflower steps where the Mayflower would have sailed from, but it also behind it has, the whole stretch of the Atlantic, this kind of archive of stories and of journeys. Laylee, I'm aware I've just waffled on for ages. Please rescue me.
I think to add to that idea of Speedwell, we used it on our website. We used a quote by Ursula K. Le Guin, which is "True journey is return." And whilst, of course, there are very today, there are reasons, climate refugees, there are people, migrants who must leave their countries, but these are often reasons that are repercussions of the forms of extraction and colonization that are still taking place today. But where there is choice, that idea that you are not from a place, but you are of a place, and that idea that we become indigenous to place by taking care of it feels very important to us. So yeah, in one direction, it talks to this idea of wanting to bring the truth forward about this history, because we have to acknowledge this history and really Britain's enormous role in this empirical history of ours. That is very much a reason why we are now facing this catastrophe in climatic change and loss of biodiversity, and a real call to take care of the diversity that is here left, and find whatever means and ways to address our human behaviors, to find forms of unification with each other and listening to each other, and other species, listening to other forms of knowledge. And it's been such a privilege. Stephanie is here, actually, Stephanie Pratt I saw, but it has been the most enormous privilege to learn about our own blindness in this journey. And we originally had proposed to put the New World on the outer breakwater, and soon discovered that that was an incredibly wounding phrase, and that subversive intent that we thought about putting that phrase up on the breakwater, as Stephanie put it, could only be deconstructed with dynamite itself. So that wasn't a way forward. And through working and listening to, as she puts it, other perceptions that make up the world, particularly Indigenous peoples, native, she's Dakota origin. I mean, she should maybe speak for herself since she's here. It'd be lovely to hear from her, but just such a privilege to have been guided, and just, it feels like it's a way forward. I feel very overwhelmed in the face of climate change, and I feel that Indigenous ways of working with land, forms of knowledge that are very alive today, are truly a guide forward for us today, and that people should really be listening very hard to these people, and learning, because they remain worldwide guardians of 80% of the biodiversity left on land today. That in itself is a huge telling fact of their lies away, which could change the history, change the future. So I think supporting plight of Indigenous peoples worldwide, listening, and letting them help guide ways forward is hugely important. So maybe we want to pass it over to questioning.
Thank you so much. I wonder if you should, I'm very reluctant, but maybe unshare, and then we'll be able to see each other.
Yeah. Did I just stop sharing that? Let me just.
Yeah.
I'm going to invite Pat to ask some questions, because I know he was very taken by it. But I would just say that even just looking at it now, and I'm really yearning, actually, that I could have seen it in the space, because it's so beautiful, even on our screens, and so evocative. And I really would like to invite Stephanie, if she's here, if she'd like to say a few words as well. I don't know if you're ready for that, Stephanie.
I know Stephanie won't turn her camera on because the camera's not working well, but she, hopefully her voice, her audio might be working.
Yeah, she's just unmuted herself. So Stephanie, please do add anything you'd like to.
Thank you, Indra, and thank you, everyone. I just wanted to kind of listen, because I love hearing people talk about this work, and the piece was so profoundly moving to me, particularly when I first met Laura and Laylee, that they actually wanted to hear my thoughts, because so many of the Mayflower 400 group didn't really want to hear what I had to say. And they felt like, well, they kind of felt like, and this is going to be a terrible thing to say, that the Indigenous people were superfluous to this, that it was about a celebration of an event that Plymouth could share in, and that it didn't really need to consider the impact. I mean, yes, it was part of it. I don't want to totally, bash it, but they had Wampanoag people involved, so they certainly had Indigenous voice. But on the ground in Plymouth, Indigenous was not on the agenda. So I really welcome these artists who brought me into this. And I worked with, well, I didn't work with them. I watched them partly put it together, and it looked like a huge effort, but it looked really fun when they were constructing it. So I'll let them obviously talk. And I can't stay on the phone the whole time. I'll have to leave, but I'm really grateful I could take part. And so I'll leave it over to you guys to discuss. Okay, thanks.
Definitely. I would say that it's kind of breathtaking, actually, that because all the time that Pat and Maria and I were working in Plymouth, we were looking forward to this year. And when I say looking forward it's like with some trepidation for exactly these reasons, and wondering how you were going to celebrate this 400th anniversary, especially with so much trouble really in our relationship with the US and in the impact that the US is currently having globally, and wondering, in the light of Extinction Rebellion and so on, what could be said, what could be celebrated about this setting off from Plymouth of the Mayflower. And it's really an extraordinary occurrence, isn't it, that COVID sort of intervened. And now this is almost the main exhibition that we're seeing, or maybe the one that's made the most impact as far as we're concerned. A very, very different message probably from what was originally envisaged, and one that is now beaming out to the world. Quite an extraordinary thing. Pat, I don't know if you want to stop me going on too emotionally, but it's actually, I do find it very moving, actually.
Yeah, no, I think it's a brilliant piece of art, but it's interesting to hear the context from the makers, and the way that thinking about the Indigenous perspective on the Mayflower celebrations changed the to no. And also I wanted to ask about the aesthetics, the kind of public aesthetics of it. I mean, do you feel I used to dive into contemporary art a wee bit, and I remember I once had an engagement with Lawrence Wiener, who's a sort of very famous public artist who uses print and text and font to kind of make statements. And then obviously there's Barbara Kruger, and there's a whole load of people. So did you feel as if you were in that kind of tradition, which is a really interesting tradition in contemporary arts, of using text in this very dramatic way? Because when I looked at it at the video, it looks like a dream. It's almost like something you would see in a dream. It's permutations of words: world, no, new, no, new world. I mean, it's as if your kind of brain is cycling through possibilities in a kind of REM state. So that's one thing. So the question is, do you feel you're in that tradition of kind of public text art, which is an interesting one in terms of art history? And then secondly, were you aware of having a kind of a Blackpool I think I said this to you previously, having a kind of Blackpool illuminations aspect to it? It's like a billboard, but it's like a billboard about an incredibly important issue, as in how do we deal with the West and the West and the rest, and the West and its legacy. So if you can pick out two questions from that, you're doing really well. But give me some kind of answer anyway.
I was thinking, in answer to your question about art and the history of art, there's an amazing essay by T.S. Eliot called Tradition and the Individual Talent.
Oh, well.
And absolutely, I feel we are very much in relationship to what has been before through text art. Barbara Kruger definitely came to my mind. I looked at her, I studied her when I studied history of art, and she was there. And we were also very much aware of people like Tim Etchells has been using text art in a very interesting way. And who's the one who Martin did a film on, who did Mother? He's
Martin Creed.
Martin Creed.
Martin Creed, yes.
Yeah, and I think the way we are very much aware of that and feel like this didn't exist, this doesn't exist without them, and that also the site specificity of it, sitting on Mountbatten Breakwater, and that very essential relationship to the ocean and its landscape is there's a whole history there as well behind us with site-specific work. The spiral jetty kind of comes to mind as the kind of beginnings of these types of work. So absolutely. And then in terms of your question about Blackpool and signage, I think we are like moths to a flame in terms of advertising and the story. But where is the truth? Like, which way do we go? Who's telling the truth? And with us, you know, the fact that we even thought the new world was possible, and the idea that that was blindness, refers to our own educations and the own process of decolonizing ourselves that is taking place for us in this time and through this artwork. So the Blackpool element for us was very much deliberate in terms of this signage, like, hey, come look at me, glitter, glitter, glitter. I'm going to sell you something. And normally that thing that's sold doesn't feel very authentic. But what we're trying to say is, oh, hold on a minute, come over here, look at this. But then when you get to it, it's bare and you see its bones. We've shown you a nighttime view of it. But if you see it in the day, it's on scaffolding. You can see its internal working. So it tries to point to a call to speak the truth to each other. And find whatever means and ways to that. So, and then the third question is about dream. That for me feels like the most important one. I think that imagination and dream is absolutely key to getting out of this. And imagination is something that is sometimes understood as existing within one's own head, but actually imagination is something which, can you go away, Kester? Imagination is, Kester was obviously keying in there, is a collective idea. It's actually a sense of keying into something that belongs to all of us. And so I think that this is what we're attempting to do with this work, is key into a collective imagination of a different way of seeing and different future, and that is very much something that we are all a part of. No individual is going to change this. It is a collective way forward with diversity of culture and people working it out together. So dreaming, imagination.
And that's very reflected in the three of us and the way we work together. You know, we're a collective of three, very much, you know, carrying on a tradition, if you like, of light or text art. But, you know, it's the message that is important rather than necessarily what medium we're working in. And it's really important that the three of us working together with other circles of people like Steph around us and other circles like this that are sort of carrying on like that, you know, there is no sole artistic genius at the heart of it. It's all, you know, dependent on conversation, upon listening, upon paying attention. And it, you know, that is challenging the kind of Eurocentric model, if you like, of knowledge or capital or how you kind of perpetuate these systems of governance. And I think, yeah, again, coming back to that idea of learning, Leah, I was looking up Tiana Jakut today, and following on from your conversation, she's a friend who helped us with the project, who has strong ties to the Mother Earth delegation, and she talks about that you're not learning, but you're remembering. And I think it's important to recognize that lots of these knowledge systems are not historic, and they're not only the preserve of indigenous societies or communities. they have maintained those traditions more strongly and stewarded them more carefully. But I think we do have it in us to find the way forward together. We've got that knowledge there somewhere, but you know, it's a bit dazzled by the sort of the billboards, if you like.
So
Can I ask?
I'm going to jump in this now.
I know. Okay.
Well, I think it's going to be a bigger conversation, but if we could just ask one or two more, and then I definitely want to open it up. But even the richness of this conversation makes me want to ask, how has that been possible as a result of you know, obviously people where are people gathering, or where can people have this conversation as a result of gazing upon this piece of art? How have you, I know that you found ways of gathering comments. Perhaps you'd like to share a little bit about that. But also I just want to ask one question myself as well, which is, when I think about no new worlds, I'm thinking on the one hand, you know, that's the end of something. I feel a little bit frightened. And then immediately I'm into the circular nature of life, and that there will never be an end to the new worlds. You know, everything is really cyclical, and going back, as you were suggesting, to the indigenous is a direction in a way. So it's quite fascinating the way that no is such a way forward, actually. But again, how does this conversation happen outside of rooms like these? How have you been able to involve people or help invite them to participate in any way?
I mean, I think for us, it's what has been a real honour and a real eye-opener in many ways is that this project is not happening in a museum or a gallery. It's happening in a public domain, which is peopled by fishermen and people walking their dogs, or people taking their grandkids out on their scooters, and they're having conversations. They're asking people about this sculpture, and we also kind of went through that nervousness with the word no, particularly sort of during COVID. We were sort of thinking, oh gosh, is it really nihilistic to be putting this statement out in the depths of lockdown, when the whole country, if they're only going to see it digitally, or they might be able to look out their window and see it, no new worlds, is that going to be a really terrifying thing to see? And there was a text that we came across by Emma Cocker called "The Yes of the No," and actually we're talking with her on Friday and doing a conversation with her, and it was really useful to us in kind of finding the strength to really stand by that no. And it stands for so many things, you know, like it's a line in the sand, like no, absolutely no more. We cannot keep perpetuating this same narrative that is always of the victor, that always marginalizes these voices. You know, no, we can't all go and colonize Mars. We need to look after this planet and use those resources here to live more equitably. And when we were putting up the structure, Laylee very brilliantly said, you know, put up the words "new worlds" first, and we'll put up "no" last. And I remember on the day when we finally put the N and the O up of no, we, you know, because before that people had been walking along the pier like, oh, it's new worlds. Oh yeah, it's about Mayflower. Yeah, I get it. Good one. You know, that kind of thing. And when we put no up, we were like, oh, you know, is it going to, it felt really like, oh shit, you know, here we go. And we were really, really heartened by how people were like, of course it wasn't a new world. Of course we've got to look after this world. And I think that really took me aback. I think I'd assumed a lot more of a kickback in like, well, why are you know, Mayflower is a great thing, blah, 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 blah. But actually, it allowed for those conversations to happen, for people to really check their understanding. And lots of people are like, why does it say no new worlds, you know? So those conversations can happen through that. People don't necessarily get it straight away, but being Plymouth, no one is afraid to ask.
Is that right?
Oh yeah.
And you can leave tags, can't you? Did you say that,
Yeah.
Laura?
No, I didn't. I completely missed that. Sorry.
Yeah,
Go for it.
there are a really wonderful group of Mayflower makers who are volunteers who are there from 11 till 5, and they engage with anyone who's walking by. They'll grab people who don't even want to look at the sculpture and just say, oh, what do you think? So that's obviously stimulating as many conversations as possible that aren't already happening. And there are these metal tags where people can actually write and tie onto the fencing that surrounds the sculpture their own whatever they want to say in response. So there's a lot of there's all sorts of things being written on that, but it's actually quite beautiful to see people really wanting to find ways of taking care of this world. It's moving to see that.
And to add their voices to the conversation as well, you know, and not all of them are pleased and delighted by what we're doing, but you know, it's just interesting that, you know, it's not confined to only our voice. We have got a really 63-meter long platform to put our voice across. It's really great that other people can add their voices to it as well. And you can, if you can't make it to Plymouth but you want to leave a tag, you can go to our website and add a message and it will get turned into a tag on the sculpture as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in relation to what feels so important is recognizing that in sort of Western privileged cultures, we just have everything, and it's that seeking for more and more which is causing enormous problems. So actually just saying no feels like an incredibly constructive word right now. We actually have to say no to certain behaviors and certain demands and certain expectations, and simplify our demands, which are, because if we weren't all buying all this stuff, you know, there is no predator who can keep selling it. So we're a part of the system, and it's a fallacy to pretend otherwise. So yeah, no, we each of us have to take on no's.
Thank you. I don't know if you have a link to the yes of the no that you mentioned.
I really
like that. That sense. Pat, have you got anything else that you'd like to before I open?
Yes, just very briefly, and very much on the Alternative UK's kind of agenda, is that we've been trying for ages, or since the start, to say to artists and creatives, not become agitprop. You know, don't put yourself at the service of a new politics. But what is it about your artistic practice that evokes, funny enough, a new world or a new system or a new experience? So I just generally, beyond what, maybe including your own practice, but beyond it, you're obviously working within a political context in the general sense, or ideological or historical or cultural. What do you think artists generally need to step up a bit more to thinking, you know, we can seize a moment here, and we can bring something that's powerful but gentle and beautiful and stylish and provocative, and put it into the heart of a community? I mean, do you think that's, or do you feel part of a movement that's beginning to do that? You know, that's looking at the current situation and saying, we can do extraordinary art that actually helps people cope with these very, very tumultuous times. I mean, I'm not asking you, are you political artists, but is there a way that intensely made art can be very political just by virtue of what it's deeply, deeply trying to do? What do you think of that?
What comes to mind for me is one of my favourite artists is Meredith Monk, and I'll just put a little quote of hers into the box there. But yeah, she believes right now there are two types of important art: political art, and equally important are those who are thinking about what an alternative reality would be, to offer an antidote and go back to the more timeless concerns of existence on Earth. Yeah. And I remember we had a conversation quite early on about, well, imagine if we could do both those things. And when you talked about that idea of dream, and you look at it and it feels dreamy, and somebody else has described it to us as a voice from elsewhere.
Yes.
that feels like maybe we're touching on those two areas of art, the politics and that alternative reality. And yeah, I would really question artists right now who are not engaging with these subjects. I think it's absolutely essential that artists and anyone who has means to address the crisis we are in is doing that with every ounce of their soul. So through whatever means they have. And I personally really believe in art as a means to heal. And I think we have so much healing to do right now. So much of the trouble is coming from great trauma that's being carried and division that lies between people. So if art can play a role, from my perspective, I think art can play many different roles, but I'm very interested in its ability to heal and take us to a place where we can find togetherness and less separation, and just completely refute forms of separation that are there just to conquer us again and again and again as people. So, and I think Laura, that's something which Laura and I really connect on, and very much connected us when we discovered that the New World was wounding. Just like, this is completely the opposite to where we'd want to go, with a belief in healing.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And of course, every time you do it in a community, it could be a completely different thing. It doesn't need to be that's the real challenge of it for artists, is to feel the vibes of their moment and their place, and then do something that hits that, which is you could be anything. Yeah,
I think Plymouth is quite an interesting place to be an artist as well, because of the nature of Plymouth itself as a city, in terms of its kind of the vacuum, if you like, of the state to a degree, and its sort of power as it's the capital of social enterprise. It's a place where the grassroots is having to fill that vacuum, and it's having to do a lot. And the majority of the artistic community are working in a very similar way as well. They're supporting each other. It's not dominated by the market, and it's about speaking to the place where you are as well. So I think we have been really lucky, and I would totally second what Laylee is saying, is that I would say the majority of artists I know are all working urgently towards these kind of issues of equality, be it political or ecological or social equality, because art is a reflection of society and of emotion, and it has that capacity to sort of bypass the logical and get into the brain and affect people in an emotional way, which I think is really powerful. And that idea of the 9 different iterations being this sort of dreamlike state, hopefully gets around. We didn't want to be didactic or finger waggy, or like, you must think this, you want to create an environment in which it's sort of, you're quite porous, it can permeate you in some way, and you might take one meaning away on a certain evening where you're looking at it, and you might get a very different interpretation of it at a very different time. And it's sort of got a dreamlike and sometimes quite playful element to it, which we hope kind of gets around the moral apathy, as Timothy Morton describes it, of people's response to climate change or capitalism, or the enormity of these things that seem unassailable.
Okay,
right,
thank you.
Thank you so much. There's so much there, and I'd like to open the floor to anybody who'd like to ask Laura and Laylee a question. Or, questions first, maybe. Pete.
Hi. Sorry, I turned my video off to protect the. I've got my daughter playing some really sappy game from the Wi-Fi next door, so I didn't want to disrupt her. But it's lovely to listen to you. I found that piece really moving, just watching it on video. It was really, really powerful and pretty amazing, I found. And I spend quite a bit of time in Hong Kong, so maybe it's the water and that whole thing, and been reflecting on that and the kind of political turmoil when I was last there. Was it influenced in any way by a piece that I'd seen at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park a number of years ago called Everything is Connected, which was lit up in the same way? I mean, I'm a Philistine, as you can clearly tell by that question. I'm an anthropologist, not an artist, but where did that inspiration come from for the kind of lit up bit?
Shall I go, Laura?
Yeah, go.
I don't know that piece you're talking about. But maybe that it's I don't know. It would be interesting. I don't know if someone's got a link to it. If we could quickly have a look. But where did it come from? I think that question earlier about text art that has been that we're well aware of, and Tim Etchell's work was very much in the forefront of our mind. We actually are friends with Tim, and Martin, who's the third part, who's not here. It was his original vision to put the new world on the breakwater, and I think he has a very kind of architectural brain, and he studied at the Bartlett, and I think for him that his mind kind of putting those words out there in response to how do we deal with this complex history at the beginning of this journey that we've been on. It was just an instinctive response, actually. This is somehow we could do this, put this out in the sea, and it felt like a calling to that site. So I think that it really started with that, and then through time we've discovered so much about language itself being an enormous, such rich topic of conversation within this process. You know, languages were taken away from these people. It was illegal to speak their native languages, and this is a tool. This phrase, the new world, was a tool to claim other people's lands. It was an ideology, and that was formed in words. There were documents made to go take those lands. The doctrine of discovery. I have this piece of paper made of words. I have the right. I mean, language is an incredible tool of communication, but it's not our only one, and we have to be aware of its limitations and its treacherous qualities, as well as its magic. It's like the ultimate magic, actually, isn't it? Words is so powerful, and it can be very black magic as well as white magic, and really important to think about that. And recently I've been thinking about how, from a really interesting writer called David Abrams, who's written the what's it called again, the sensory, you remember, Laura?
Smell of the Sensuous.
The Sensuous. And it's very interesting, his thoughts about language, talks about how our alphabet is actually referring to the human sound itself. Whereas when you go to pictorial Mayan languages or the Egyptian, constantly you have signs of nature inside this. You have the bird or the wind or the, different kind, which is constantly reminding humans that we're just part of a bigger system. Whereas the alphabet language is referring to ourselves the whole time. It's our own sound. And in that, there's a sort of anthropocentric issue that we need to be very aware of. It kind of becomes self-referential back to ourselves. So the fact that we use capitalization, like no, new world, I mean, it's kind of shouting in some ways, even though it has that dreamy effect. There's also a side to it, which is dominating, the capitalization. And I think these questions of language itself are really relevant to the history that we're dealing with, and the ways we need to find routes forward.
There's also a degree to which in its initial iteration of it being out on the outer breakwater, which is nearly 3 miles out to sea, saying the new world, there was an intention there that it was this kind of this almost like utopia like destination that can never be reached, and really kind of exploring that metaphor of the speedwell. We hoped to take people out to this weird thing out in the sea and then bring them back, and that journey would be a place or an opportunity to really kind of question those ideas and really think about, what does it mean to leave, what does it mean to come back, and what happens on that journey. But yeah, I mean, we were so we were so guided by Steph, and as soon as we knew that how wounding the new world was as a statement, you know, that you just could not responsibly continue with that. And luckily we'd already kind of worked up these other things, and it was very much like, all it could say this, and we went through some terrible ideas like, oh, maybe we could cross out new, or maybe we, you know, it was just awful. And we kind of together, the three of us, went through these peaks and troughs of kind of falling out and arguing about it, thinking we had the answer, and then sleeping on it and going, oh no, we can't do this. And it is that sort of like playing with words, what works, what sits well, what has meaning. And because this story has so many layers of meaning, it's our intention with these 9 different phrases that you can draw out elements, you know, a bit, I guess, a bit like the idea of the elephant. You know, you can see one bit of it at a time, and maybe slowly you begin to piece it together and recognize the entanglement of it all.
I'd like to go into breakout rooms now, actually, and I'm hoping, Laura and Laylee, you've got a question that you would like the breakout rooms to address.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we've put it in the chat box. So you could just take the first part of the question, but if you want, you can go into the second part too.
You just want to read it out?
How can I repair the world inside of me so that I might be better equipped to repair the world outside? With that process underway, can I ask others what their needs are and be open to what they see as a need in me?
It's an amazing couple of questions, and I'm really inviting everyone to take part in these breakout rooms now. We'll have 15 minutes and we'll come back, or should we say 20 minutes? No, 15 minutes, I think is about right. And then we'll come back and share our thoughts and have any further questions for the two of you. But until then, that was a beautiful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So welcome back, everyone, and we've got a lovely sized group now, and I think we could have a bit of a conversation amongst ourselves. How was it for anyone who'd like to begin to speak?
Rosamund, you go.
Yeah, I was waiting for you. You were making the notes. No, we had a very wonderful conversation. Yeah, it was very beautiful, and kind of dialoguing about our personal journeys, and we were exploring this idea of how our voice is the important thing. Like, we don't have to be anything else. You know, what is our story? What are our experiences? What are these knowledges that we've kind of gained through our lived experiences, and that voice, an authentic voice with vulnerability, you can build, you know, really powerful relationships and really transformative experiences with others, without being kind of in environments where you feel like you have to put your armor on and you have to kind of try and illustrate a kind of status within the current systems that we're trying to live within. So Leonie, were there any other additions to that, or have I summarized okay?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Just this idea of valuing our own voice, and I guess in that too, being open to listening to everyone else's own voice, and breaking down the facades and the faces between us that separate us.
Did you talk, Ros, about having lived in Plymouth, and could you imagine that piece of art?
Yeah, no, I mentioned to Leonie that I'd only recently left. I would love to have seen it in person, but the video was very, very powerful. And interestingly, I actually worked with Stephanie 3 years ago when I was working for the UK Parliament, and I did workshops with some of the schools around Plymouth, and I asked for her advice because I wanted to share ideas around self-governance. And how different tribes did that in the Americas, even before colonization, and looking at kind of the monarchy and things like that. So I'd worked a little bit with Stephanie on that too. Yeah.
Can I just make a point about seeing such an artwork in Plymouth?
Yes.
Because I've been here since 2001. And I think Speedwell is an absolute triumph. I really do. 8 years ago, I was kind of half involved in Mayflower 400 on the very outside of it, and the language was absolutely disgraceful. They were actually, the kind of Destination Plymouth were talking about Mayflower made America great. That's what they actually said in their language, which was just extraordinary. And it made people like me withdraw from it. So I wanted to do some stuff, and I just turned my back on it and did my own thing. And when I saw Speedwell unveiled, I thought that was absolutely magnificent. And I loved Laura's description of smuggling it in, because I think that's exactly what has happened. I think art changed in Plymouth after the British Art Show 7 in 2011, and things started moving. But I still think there's, and of course we've had the real acceleration of the art college here, which has been absolutely magnificent. So you have, some great art being built, made and produced, but I still think you have a disconnect with what's happening in the general population. And it's brilliant to bring a piece like that to them, so the questioning can really begin. And I think it's been wonderful. In fact, I think the context is so important here. I actually would like to see it here permanently, quite frankly, because I think of all the places you would need it, it's here, because this is where the myth began, and it's where, in a way, it's continued.
And I'm just wondering, Alan, if you think about, and this is a conversation Laura and Lenny and I had in preparation for this conversation, which, was already the conversation, but if you think about the nuclear submarines, but also, I'm not sure if this is going to happen, but it could well be that Plymouth will become a free port in the near future. If you don't know anything about free ports.
No, I do. I come from Liverpool. Yeah.
Right. It could be a free port. There's so much.
Yep.
That could still go wrong for Plymouth in terms of the big narrative.
Yes. Yeah.
And one of the excitements, one of the reasons we've never really moved away from our initial sense that Plymouth had the possibility of being a really big story of transformation is exactly because of its history, its global resonance and role, and the story it can tell of transformation. But we never expected it to go so fast, so far.
Yes, that's true.
To the point. At exactly this time was a real shock in a way. So in a way, you might think something is on the side of Plymouth to be able to tell a new story at exactly the time that it matters. But how are we doing that? And what we're trying to do with the alternatives, build what we call citizens action networks in across Plymouth, just to have the conversation, really, to have the conversation and to build a new system. Yeah, and not simply to rise up or protest. We're not thinking about protest. We're thinking about giving rise to a whole new system. Of the relationship between the person and the planet through the community. And I will just invite Dean in here, because Dean's one of the people who works with us in that kind of. Still, it's mostly the work of imagination right now, right, Dean? We're thinking something could happen, which is not quite happening, but. Anyway, how did you feel when you saw?
When I saw the piece, I almost cried with joy, because the piece really invoked in me that I actually had a debate with an American tourist that was sat next to me going, God, isn't this great? And I thought, you don't understand this piece at all, do you? Okay. So was it a new world that you discovered in America? That, yeah, well, we can't get it and we did it. Oh, really? So what happened to the people that were there beforehand? Oh, no, we discovered the world. So there was no one there before you discovered. I mean, this debate went on for about 2.5 hours. And in the end, you just went, yeah, okay, yes, good piece of art, and walked away. And I thought, well, that's a really nice seed that I planted there, because now he's going to go away and talk to the other people in his hotel about that piece of art. So rather than attacking him for his ignorance, just actually talking to him with a soft whispering tone instead of shouting like I usually do, I found was so effective that I'm very much of a convert to this whispering idea rather than shouting idea. In fact, I'm even trying to get all my XR rebels to whisper now instead of shout, because I think the power of whispering is far better, because if you whisper, someone has to pay attention.
So true.
Whereas if you shout, people can just switch off. So sneaking this speedwell in there, and on such a powerful year, I think was just a seminal point for the regrowing of this new movement that we've got going in Plymouth. As I always say, less is more, and actually growing a new environment from the bottom up instead of the top down is the way forward. The top down has been toxic. It hasn't worked. Look what it's done. And that's the conversation I try and have with other people. And they almost seem to be ready for that conversation now. So I think we are at a seminal moment.
Thank you, Dean.
I just wanted to say to that. So I was trying to think why don't I feel racist? I mean, I'm sure there are aspects of me that perhaps are. And one of the things I go back to is some of the singers we used to listen to when we were children. And at school, I went to school with Laura, and we used to listen a lot to Tracy Chapman and adore her. And of course, in her song, which some of you might remember, read those lyrics. Don't you know they're talking about a revolution? It sounds like a whisper.
Yes.
Just to jump in then as well, Dean, thank you for your comments. We've had so many instances like that, which have been quite often hilarious. I was just telling Pete about how I was standing next to the sculpture, and this lady walked along, and I said, "Oh, what do you think of this?" And she was like, "Not much." And then we ended up having this kind of, and I was like, right, well, I'm one of the artists. And we ended up having this kind of half an hour conversation, which she still didn't like it by the end, but she'd left a tag and she'd thought about it, and she'd thought about what it said. And I think our role that we learned in the process of constructing it, of being in that place, and that our volunteers that we've really tried to get across with them, and they're amazing at it, is of kind of creating friendships or friendly moments of common ground where you can talk about things, and the language is so important. And Laylee and I had an experience where we were talking with a guy about climate change or climate emergency, and he was like, "Oh, nonsense, it doesn't work, it's rubbish, my son's a scientist, rah, rah, rah." You know, the shutters came down, we couldn't get any further with him. But when you talk about, you know, we need to look after this world, no one's going to go, "Oh no, we don't," you know. So the finding that way of talking about things in a gentle whisper is definitely something we have learned is the revolution.
Yeah, and I think in this way, that's where art can be transformational. I think that's so important nowadays. I really do.
It's the relay, isn't it, to also understand that. I found that really helpful when somebody first said that to me, to understand we're all part of a process, and it can feel exhausting not to see the change happening right then and there, but understand we each play our part. And you know, when I bring up that idea of Tracy Chapman, thinking about those artists that have become, that we fell in love with as children, you know, and break down racial relationships because of that, because you know, and so that work that someone like her has done through getting in my mind as a child is enormous.
I'd quite like to hear if anybody attempted the question that you said, because it did, to me, it arose very directly from the experience, and maybe I'm gonna pick on Maria now to say to how did it speak to you, Maria?
Yeah, I really love that you asked such questions, because they asked for like a self-reflection, and what often happens when you see like a piece of art, like it triggers a self-reflection, and especially this one makes you think about your relationship to the world and what it was and what it can be and what it will be, and then thinking, well, how does others then, what are other people thinking? And so even though we're like in this Zoom call, like there was a common experience of you showing the art and seeing it, and then this reflection kind of starting to emerge. And I was talking to Anne, and we could kind of see like, well, that seeing this art kind of help us to reflect on these questions in some kind of weird, deep way. And I guess it just reminded me how art is so, it's so important in that way for political processes or political change, because it triggers that kind of reflection and a common experience that takes you into something that's a little bit away from yourself. And yes, as we've done it when we had the Plymouth event, we've always had some kind of art that to create some kind of discombobulation, as Indra says, or some kind of like, whoa, that was like interesting experience and thoughts. And then from that, there seems to be a more kind of, well, curiosity is tweaked, which I think is very important for the first questions of thinking, how does my inner world and my inner healing, or can't really remember what it was, but how does that then reflect in the outer world and the outer healing? So yeah, it was great to kind of have the whole art experience, really, even though we were in Zoom. So yeah, thanks for that.
There was somebody here who had to leave early. I think he was in conversation with one of you, Pete, and he said that he was so moved by watching it on video that he was wondering if it could ever be as powerful in real life, which I hadn't even considered. But to me, I realized I was being very naive, but picking up on what Maria was saying, that immediately when you see a piece of art and you start to reflect and you have thoughts, I immediately want to capture the conversation in some way, because for me that is politics. It's in the presence of art that you start to think in the ways that you need to think before you're making decisions, or before you're thinking even of policy. You need to be discombobulated in some way, or you need to be opened up in some way. But and when I say I was being naive, as I forgot, that you don't do that with art. You let it sit. You let yourself reflect. You don't immediately try and capture everybody's thoughts and and then try to turn them into something, which is what we do with our collaboratories. But I wonder if there isn't. Yeah, is there a new relationship with art and politics that could be more direct than we watch art in one space, we do politics in another? We're trying to bring them into the same space without threatening the artist. And what I mean by that is we don't want the artist to start to think of themselves as functional to politics. Obviously not. That's not the intention. And yet the gap between the two seems too big to me, because you lose the moment. Almost you're having that reflection, and then it's great that you spoke to people on the pier, because they had a chance to deepen that, or to land it or ground it in some way. A lot of people will have had these thoughts and then no engagement, really. No way to take them further, or no way to materialize in some way those thoughts for I mean, I wonder I wonder what I would like to be able to pick up this power that you generated and use it for Plymouth and for Plymouth's role in the world. I'm not sure how to.
Anyone got any ideas?
Yeah, lots of big questions there.
I think I'd like to sort of say, I think that it starts with curiosity. And I think that what happens with a lot of our political systems, and possibly many systems, is that we lose our curiosity because we're entrenched in our own position. And we only see the things that we allow ourselves to see. And I think that is exemplified with a lot of our technology. You know, our algorithms and our social media feeds are curated for us. And I think what's interesting and exciting about this sculpture, about Speedwell, is that actually it's in the landscape, and also it prompts curiosity. It prompts, you know, you start to ask yourself, well, what does it mean? What does that sentence mean? What do the words mean? And you start to dislocate your own internal frame. And I think that that's something that's really very powerful. If we can, you know, start to wobble fixed notions, I think that's really, that process becomes quite, you know, quite powerful. And if we do actually believe what we say we believe, that the internal and external are porous and maybe they have an exchange, a relationship of exchange, then actually we can trust some of the process, that actually this work does the work, you know, that it does provoke the curiosity. It is, without us needing to control it, it might actually be doing quite a lot of work by itself.
It's like that idea of being, we talked about that, Rosamund and I, being in the presence of something affects, we're constantly affecting each other. And it's giving respect to the artwork itself as doing that, as having a presence and a voice, which is subliminally affecting us all.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. I cycle down past the Hoe almost every day, and when I look across and see Speedwell, it sparks a different feeling or a different thought process on every occasion. You're right, it should do. But I'm not at all optimistic that this government values art in any other way than materialistically. I mean, every government office, minister's office is crammed with the best of British art, but I don't see anything coming out in terms of appreciation or the likelihood to change.
I'd say, Alan, just to slightly reorientate you, that from the alternatives point of view, when we're thinking about politics, we're not necessarily thinking about the government, and we're not necessarily.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, but we can be political ourselves.
Yeah.
And be thinking about the future.
Yeah.
And how do we land that? Maybe that's a question for another event, because I've just noticed the time has slipped away massively. Does anybody else want to say some final words before we let you go, because it's already 6:30? And Laura, I don't know if you're there, but maybe you're not. I'm talking about the Laura Graham in the corner.
I thought so. Well, I am definitely here.
I can see you there. So Laura and Laylee, would you like to say any final words before we?
Oh, I thought we ought to say about Amplify and also our talks program. When you just raising that question of art and politics, I think next week, for example, Martin's going to be in conversation with Christophe, who's a very interesting artist from Belgium. And he set up a really interesting economic system as well, with a group of other artists and like-minded folk, including lawyers and things like that, called Common Wallet, where they all shared their money. And really interesting, radical economic systems they've been experimenting with. But Christophe's conversation is very much about this question. He was an artist, and then he got involved with Extinction Rebellion. And he talks about how actually what he was seeking for as an artist, he began to feel much more fulfilled creatively within the system of XR. So I think that will be a really interesting, very relevant conversation to what's been coming up here. So please, the talks program, if we could put that.
Yeah, I was going to say, could you put that in the link? That would be great.
Yeah, and maybe Laura, you want to just sum up Amplify as well, let people know about that, and please join our social media thing so we can keep you posted on that.
Yeah, definitely. So we've always wanted to extinguish. We're also looking for a better word than extinguish, if anyone can come up with one. But the sculpture will extinguish. It will begin its final dimming on the 26th of November, which is Thanksgiving, which is also known among many Indigenous communities as the day of mourning. And so we want it to switch off on that day, and at that moment to provide a space for voices that have been and continue to be marginalised within the story of the Mayflower, and also indeed by the Mayflower programme. So we're doing a last bit of smuggling into the Mayflower programme, and we're hoping to sort of create with our partners Survival International, who are an advocacy charity working with Indigenous peoples worldwide, a campaign whereby when our lights go off, lights can go on around the world to mark this moment and to really honour Indigenous voices in this city on this date, 400 years after what was supposed to be this wonderful bucolic moment where bread was broken, but actually marked the sort of the sharp end of a genocidal movement. So yes, last bit of smuggling, but we would really encourage you to sort of follow that progress, and we're going to begin the process of marking that throughout November, which is Indigenous American Heritage Month. So we'll be trying to sort of highlight those voices all the way through that month leading up to that final date. And if we can, we'd love to do something in person in the city whereby when our lights go off, people can light their own lights, but it will depend on COVID and how things unfold. So up in the air.
I'm trying to will myself down there for that time and see what could happen.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I feel a little bit reborn, actually, in a funny sort of way, and I'm excited for what will happen in Plymouth over this next year. And thank you, everyone, for joining in with us again. I like the size of this conversation, so I hope you've enjoyed it too. And it'll be shared on the Alternative Weekly and Daily in the coming week. Yes, just hope to see you again soon, and good night.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you all.